Hey there! This is Lingering Whispers 1.0.1 Developer's Commentary by Scary Kitties. We'll be doing this on Expert.
Garrett, though one such as yourself is probably not aware, I have recently acquired an extravagant collection of antique masks. Sadly, my collection lacks a centerpiece. I understand that the Mechanist Order once owned a warehouse where they kept some very interesting relics. My sources inform me that its vault holds a most fantastic mask that would perfectly complete my collection. The warehouse has since been partially renovated as new offices, but I'm sure that is no issue for a master thief. Acquire the mask for me, and you will be handsomely rewarded. Oppose me, and I will demonstrate competence in ways that Ramirez failed. From what I hear, you may wish to invest in some holy water. Awaiting your compliance. Lord Rhine von Crane.
Well, it's a job.
Well, that was one of my very first attempts at voice acting. A bit over the top, a bit amateurish, a bit crappy microphone, a bit excessive compression on the audio files. Yes, very true. The awesome Garrett impersonation was done by Sly Fox, who's kind of the go-to guy at the TTLG or Through the Looking Glass forums for Garrett impersonations. He really does a brilliant job. Now, I'll probably be referencing Fan Phoenix's awesome Lingering Whispers 1.0.1 Let's Play that he did about a year ago, and I really appreciate it. He did a fantastic job, and props to him. You can find the link in the description of this video. I highly recommend you view it so you know kind of what I'm referencing, but I'll try to explain things well enough that you can tell what I'm talking about anyway. Now, as you saw, there are an awful lot of objectives there. That's because I wanted to explain everything ahead of time. I didn't want to bog down the mission itself with an explanation of what we're doing, that is the player, what the player's doing, and why he is there, and why he should care about anything. I wanted to keep all that stuff focused to just the objectives, and that resulted in the objectives being long to give the player a sense of some kind of purpose. Now that door there, that secret door, unfortunately very clearly stands out from the wall around it. Now if you don't know how level editing for the Dark Engine works, there's basically two things. There's brushes, which make the big solid objects, such as these huge crates I'm standing on. It makes up most of the level's geometry. And then there's objects, which you can add to the level as their own separate meshes, such as this box that I'm currently plucking arrows from. Now, objects and brushes have a slightly different light rendering method. I don't really know the details. I just know that especially lower poly objects tend to have the light spread across them more than a brush should. So like that secret door is kind of illuminated there. It's probably because there's a teeny bit of light getting to it, and it renders it as brighter than the brush around it would. They just handle the light differently, which is unfortunate if you're trying to hide something with a door in a flat wall like I was there. It's much wiser to use something that's a little less obviously standing out as a secret door. For instance, maybe a shelf in front of a wall. You know, you could mistake the shelf object as just being a shelf, not being aware that it's actually concealing something. So that really wasn't an option for me in that particular case, so I just kind of bit the bullet. Now, I made this fan mission about 2 years after working with Tiki on the Tribal Breeze fan mission. And as I mentioned in my developer's commentary for the Tribal Breeze, I had very little control over things like adding objectives, actually getting the mission to work. I just did some building of geometry with brushes, and I threw some objects in there and did some very simple pseudo scripting, and that was about it. A few readables, and that's pretty much the majority of what I handled. By the time I came back to do this, I'd forgotten the majority of that, so I had to basically relearn everything from the ground up. And if you would look at the mission file for this level, you'd kind of see that some of the stuff towards the beginning of where I started building is a lot more simplistically put together than some of the things later on, because I was literally learning as I went. By the time I got to where we are right now in the mission, I was probably about 3/4 or so of the way through building the mission, so I didn't actually get to this part right here until fairly late on in development. So things here are set up decently, I'd say. But there are other places where I didn't have nearly as much an idea of where I was going with it. This mission, in a lot of ways, was kind of thrown together as I went. But since that was the case, I think that it doesn't look too bad overall, considering that I just kind of went with it as I was going. Now, I avoided adding any of my own objects because at the time of making this, I didn't know how to make my own objects, and I was kind of afraid to take that plunge. Because if I started adding new objects, it's very easy to fall into the trap of, oh, this would be cool, I should make an object for this, or that would be cool, so I should make an object for that. And before you know it, all you're doing is making objects. Dozens of new objects, and it takes up all your time, and you're almost building nothing in the real editor itself. And that's kind of a pitfall that I've fallen into at the moment, since I am doing more level modding, level editing, whatever, level creation once more. And now I'm actually getting into creating my own objects, and I tend to fall into that trap of just wanting to make more and more, and then nothing actually gets built. Well, part of the success of this mission was because I decided early on that I didn't know how to make objects, so I wasn't going to bother. So I went completely with things I could just find in the mission itself. Some people tend to borrow a lot of objects from other FM authors, and that's probably a wise way to get around that, because you can have all the advantage of having new, neat stuff, but not having it take you forever to actually build it. But unfortunately, I tend to be a little on the prideful side, and I feel like it's me giving up or just being lazy and ripping someone off if I use someone else's objects, aside from the stock objects, of course. So I tend to want to either make my own stuff or just stick with what's already here. Because otherwise, I could be pulling in objects from other people, and then it makes it feel like the level isn't my own, because I'm like, oh man, that's so cool, but I didn't build it myself, so it's not really mine, and I'm just taking something someone else made that was awesome and borrowing it and repurposing it, and I don't know, it just makes me feel kind of scummy. So I prefer to either make everything myself entirely or just not use it, which is probably kind of a failure as far as my own mindset goes, because things could be a lot better if I'd be willing to just go ahead and use other people's objects. But I guess it's just something I'm either going to have to deal with or accept that I'm not going to be having. Now, on a similar note, I don't actually use any additional textures, brand new brush textures, that is. It's kind of ironic, because when this level came out, people said that it was being classic, and it was unique because it was using all normal textures. Like all these brick textures, all these wood panel textures, all that stuff. It was all already with Thief 2. I didn't even use any Thief Gold stuff. This is all stuff from Thief 2 itself. So, it's funny because even though people complimented me on that, I'm just kind of sitting back, biting my finger, thinking to myself, well, actually it's just because I was half lazy, half selfish. So they call it an advantage, and I call it kind of me being lucky that I happen to have made this with original textures at the same time that everyone else was making missions with brand new textures. So my stuff looked unique in comparison only because everyone else was being awesome and I was not quite as awesome in comparison, so it made me stand out.
You don't look so tough.
Yeah, so we have our little lesbian couple. I just thought it'd be kind of cute, that's all. Maybe I was a little stereotypical with them because one is clearly kind of the butch and the other one's kind of sweet. So, I don't know. I still kind of like it. Similarly, I like the way that these offices here are kind of put together with the brick and the wood paneling and kind of the stone all mixed together. I wish I would have made kind of a mansion based off of that aesthetic. But as it turned out, I just kind of tossed it in with the whole warehouse thing because I'm like, oh, brick plus brick, blah, brick plus brick, you know, why not? But if I could go back, I would probably remake that area I was just in so that there'd be a more open, large link between these huge offices here, well, these huge warehouses here, I mean, and that entrance area up on the upper left of the map. I know that Fen was really confused by this map when he saw it, and I guess I can't blame him, but I didn't lay out the mission before I built it. Up to this point, I've always just kind of gone with whatever I put. I'm like, I start with one room and I kind of flesh it out and finish it, and then I'm like, okay, what would come next? Maybe this kind of room. So I build another room next to it and then flesh that out. I'm like, okay, what's next? Maybe this or this. And then it just kind of grows out organically from there. Now, there's advantages and disadvantages to that. I think that worked really well for me in Tribal Breeze because that was an organic foresty area, so it should look like it kind of was growing outward. Now, I think that I got lucky because not a lot of people have made warehouse missions, and that's kind of what drove me to make this, because I'm like, hey, I've never really seen a warehouse mission. That'd be kind of cool. So there's not a lot that people can compare this to, which is fortunate for me. But I think that my level design was a little on the excessively organic side. I wish that I would have had a little more planning ahead so that things felt more designed and a little less thrown together. But that's just the way it turned out. And from what I can tell, people still enjoyed this mission just fine. So I guess I kind of got lucky there. Now, as I was saying, I wish that the entrance area and this warehouse area would have been connected with something else besides the offices I went with. And that's largely just because of the logic of how would someone have gotten these enormous crates into this room, considering all you've got is a double door connecting this room to the exit gates. So it really doesn't make much sense. I decided pretty early on, though, that I was going to go with an old mechanist warehouse. And similarly, earlier on, I decided I was going to go with this mask. He's going to taunt us in just a moment.
You retire from saving the world by returning to your petty ways, thief. Have you never considered your future?
Yeah, that's also more voice acting by yours truly. I think that turned out a little better than the Sir, or than the Von Crane guy. That's me using a low gravelly voice and then pitch shifting it and stuff. I don't know. I think it's a little difficult to understand at times, but I suppose it fit the bill well enough. Now, as for me choosing that particular mask, I had originally been going to go with the demon mask, but I like how this mask has more of a smirk to it, so it looks a little more taunting. And I wasn't even aware that I used the same mask laughing in Tribal Breeze. I'd forgotten about that. That was that particular mask. But maybe I was subconsciously influenced by that fact, because I ended up using the same one. Now, these copper ore, that's one of the few new textures I made. I did make also some new textures for the Mechanist zombies that you will see after a bit. And then I made well, basically I just hue shifted the normal textures for whatever that was, bits of rubble, rocks maybe. But I suppose it did the trick. Now, Fen was also kind of confused by this map, and I guess I can understand why. Yeah, it is a puzzle map, and I'll kind of explain how it works as we go. There's a... Yeah, see that right there is the copper. Cu, the chemical element for copper. That's what we got. Now these arrows are showing where the tunnels are connected to each other. So anywhere those two arrows are, that's where you can move through. Now anywhere that there aren't arrows, or there's like a big stain, or the map seems to be torn or broken, that's basically indicating that no, you can't get through there because for whatever reason something's blocking your way or something. I think it turned out decently as a puzzle, although I know Fen didn't really tackle it, but now that's been explained. Choosing to have the copper weigh you down, I think, was a good decision. It forces you to be kind of careful with when you're carrying it. And the reason it drops 3, which may be kind of confusing because you really only need 1 copper and 1 tin to make the bronze stuff you need, that's just because they can be destroyed or thrown places where you can't get to them. And maybe it would have been wiser to just make them indestructible, but I don't know, I wanted to make sure that if someone screwed up by doing something stupid, they'd have 1 or 2 spares to go back and not get completely stuck. Basically, the idea is that this Mechanist warehouse once belonged to the Hammerites. This is an old chapel that they had put in way back. That's actually a healing font right there. There's the Goblet of Yang. That's one of the... that connects to the Goblet of Balance quest. And that skull will come in kind of useful later on. I'll demonstrate how that whole thing works. Now, going back to the way things were built kind of organically, a problem I always felt was that the whole thing in a top-down perspective just doesn't look very logical at all. It's got a really strange shape to it, and that's probably why that map is so confusing. That very first map that shows the way the warehouse is laid out. I guess it probably would have also helped if I did auto maps, but not only am I kind of lazy, but I also don't really like auto maps because, I don't know, I just prefer the player to have to figure out where they are kind of on their own, to be honest. This level has this mission that is has a lot of lights that are turned off because I just felt like there should be lights in places, but that it wouldn't make sense for them to be turned on. So I have a lot of lights with switches that are turned off, and they're entirely pointless. In hindsight, I really should have just left them turned on, even if it didn't make any sense, because it just adds a little bit of gameplay at least, rather than just having them be there for no good reason. That's what the skull does. If you throw it down, it spawns a Hammerite haunt, which is supposed to be kind of the ghost of the brother Arnold. And he will probably kick your butt. Yeah. If that seems pointless, just wait. You'll see what the point is after a while. Now, with that map, I made the map of this area by going into Drawmed, that is the Thief 2 level editor. And I basically took a screenshot of everything I'd built after I was finished. And then I very carefully found the lines of the actual thing, like the actual level itself. And then I very clumsily drew it out with my with a Wacom tablet. And that's how I came to that map. I don't like the look of it, to be honest. It's very sketchy and sloppy, and it doesn't look very good. But I'm not a very good drawer, so I've never felt like I was very good at making maps. I'll just have to experiment sometime with different ways to do it better. But in the case of this mission, it's kind of a clumsy mess, in part because I wasn't very strong with the lines and I implied things that weren't there. Like, I didn't want to seem like all there was this big interior area, so I made some notes of like, oh, there's guards here and there's a guard post over here, when really that's not in the mission. That was supposed to be kind of like, oh, well, Garrett got past that outside and now he's inside. So those are like notes for areas that he passed earlier. But I think in the end that just confuses people, and I really shouldn't have done that in hindsight. It's something to know for the future, though. Kind of a learning experience. Now this area is probably some of the first 4 offices I actually made. This is one of the first rooms, and I enjoy how they came out. I tend to get a little nervous when I make rooms, though, because rooms tend to feel empty for me for whatever reason. It's probably because when I'm actually building the rooms, I'm looking at them with Lite-Brite on. Now, if you're not aware, Lite-Brite basically just means that in the editor, everything is lit as if there is light everywhere, so you can see what you're doing. Otherwise, things would be so dark you couldn't tell what you were really doing. So it's important for you to be able to see like that. But the downside is that things will look empty and flat because they don't have any shadows or any variation in the light or color. And that makes it seem like areas are big and empty. So I kind of compensated for that by filling areas with tons and tons and tons of objects. That worked really well in that toy maker's office that we were just in. But in some places I think the areas just feel cramped and overfilled. And it also kind of bothers me when I'm making new missions now, because especially if I'm making a mission that requires new objects, and if I'm making those new objects, that just means that I've got a requirement of all these new objects that I'd have to personally build because they don't exist, and I'm too proud to use someone else's objects because it makes me feel like even if I give credit and it's all okay with everyone, I just feel like I'm being lazy by using someone else's objects. So, foolishly perhaps, I'd rather just use stock objects or imply something or build an object myself, but I don't really care to use someone else's pre-made objects. I don't know, I just don't like it personally. But that means that if I'm trying to fill a space by decorating with tons of objects, that means I've got all these hours of work lined up of building I've got to do for all these new objects to fill a space. It's just kind of a bad mental fallacy and a bad practice as far as level design goes. That's something I'm going to have to personally work on as I continue to work in the Dark Engine. Notice that those spectacles aren't loot. Now, this level has a lot of loot, and the loot goal really isn't that high. That's because I felt like, well, in Thief Gold, spoilers I suppose, in Thief Gold we learned that Garrett plans to retire in style, quote-unquote, on about 100,000 whatever. You know, we don't really know what the units of measurement are, really. We say, like, 1,000 gold or whatever. But 100,000. So, with how much stuff I put in this level, how much loot I added, if I had left all the values of the loot as they normally would be, you'd probably get between 6,000 and 8,000 gold by the time the level was done. And I just felt like that was way too much. So to compensate for that, I went in and lowered the value of pretty much everything. Sometimes very significantly. Now, it seemed like a good idea at the time because I want to reward the player for exploring by giving them things. Like, here, you've got this nice room with all these tools at your disposal, right? So, good idea, right? And then in those other places, you get all that loot for exploring. It's like, hey, good job. This room has a point. It's not just here for no reason. But I think that, to some degree, I take that to a great extreme. There's too much stuff in everything. So, as with there just being too many objects, there's too much purpose to each room. So I overcompensate and over-reward the player. And the result is that there's just too much stuff, and everything you get is worth less in your mind. And in this case, it's literally worth less because I knocked down all the loot amounts. kind of a mistake of me as an early level designer, I suppose. Something I would do differently if I went back and remade this mission. I recently, after I recorded this developer's commentary video, not the audio, of course, I'm obviously doing a post commentary here, but after I recorded the video, I found a lot of mistakes with the 1.0.1 version of this fan mission. Some things that Fenn himself had pointed out or discovered, but I had never heard any complaints by anyone else, so I assumed it was just unique to him. But after playing this myself and finding a lot of the same problems, and you'll see them as we go along and I'll explain them, I decided, what the heck, and I recently released a 1.0.2 version. And the idea behind that was to fix those things that were supposed to be fixed in 1.0.1 but didn't get fixed, and no one really reported it as a bug or a problem, so I never realized that they never got fixed. So I just wish that people were a little more vocal and gave a little more feedback, like, hey, why is this way? It should be this way because this is implied in such and such and such. I'm not really, don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying I'm surprised that I had to rely on Fenn's Let's Play in order to get reliable feedback, But in any case, I think I forgot the point I was trying to make. I apologize. Okay, so this is one of the rooms connected to the main story. Well, not the main story per se, but this is an important room for continuing the main quest, that is getting the mask. Namely, that valve there needs to be opened. So the main water needs to be turned on. And I have this little readable here explaining some of that, a little hint about it. Now, there's an area later on, which I'll point out when we get to it, that allows you to get from this level, that is the floor level, down into chapel level beneath the main level. And in order to get down there, you could one option is to climb through a boiler. Now, I don't actually show that in this video because frankly I kind of forgot that this was the case, and Fenn doesn't do it either because he was not aware of this. But as soon as you turn on this primary water pressure, that route that quickly gets you from this ground level down into the chapel closes. There's a drain pipe that I'll come to later that would be open, allowing you to climb down a ladder inside of it and come out of a boiler. Now, as soon as I turn on that water flow, it seals off the drain and locks the boiler, so you can't get in anymore. The idea behind that was, well, the boiler is supposed to be full of water, so it can be a boiler. So I figured, well, if the water's turned on, it's got to be full of water, and I can't really depict that very easily, so I'd rather just seal it off so the player doesn't get to see that it's not actually full of water, and then I just imply with sound effects that's full of water, right? Well, makes sense. And also from a gameplay perspective, it's kind of like a door closing, window opening kind of thing, right? Because as you take a step closer towards turning on the power, which will open up the some of the ways you can't get to at the moment, as you take that step, you also close off areas that you were able to go through before. So it's kind of a compromise sort of thing. And I think that's good from a gameplay perspective, although I can understand the confusion. Because Fenn was confused about why the boiler is closed and locked and why there's a drain where it is, and it just didn't make much sense to him. And I can understand the perspective when you haven't seen the whole thing in context, why it seems very confusing. But in general, I can kind of pridefully, I suppose, say that most of the things done in this level weren't really an accident. Most things. Now, the whole thing about people thinking this is amazing because it uses original textures, that was incidental. But most of the gameplay decisions made in here were intentional for better or worse. So, take that for what you will. Now, earlier I made some notes in my map about the numbers on those big bay doors, and I'd highly recommend that be done by anyone who's playing this mission, because it'll help out a lot later on. And I hope that the big numbers would kind of clue someone in as, hey, these might be kind of important, especially since it's the same kind of bay doors used in the second level of Thief 2, that is the shipping and receiving, wherein you, similar to here, you need to go to a number thing, a number pad, and dial in the number for the bay door, and then the bay door will open. So I was hoping that people's experience playing Thief 2 would be enough of a hint and a reminder for what you need to do in order to accomplish that feat. This is a amusing little area. I had fun trying to make this so that this guy looks like a complete screw-up. It was fun doing that kind of stuff. It had been initially that those gears, after you enter this room, they would like explode. Like they're spinning right now, but it had been that once you enter the room, it'd wait a few moments, and then there'd be like an explosion there, and then they'd stop moving. But the problem is that that explosion tended to alert the guards, who would then come for you, so I had to cut that part out. But I still kind of like the mess it made. As for some of the names in this level, there's some things like this mechanist guy is called Jean or Jean or something, however you want to pronounce it, but it's like Jean or Jean Boatyard. Well, that's kind of a pun that I'm so embarrassed I'm not even going to get into it. But I was like trying to be kind of clever with the names, and in hindsight, a year later, I think my hubris was a lot greater than my actual wit. So I'm kind of embarrassed about the kind of jokes that I was making, or the kind of references I was making, because I feel like an idiot for trying to be clever in such a clumsy way. If you're not sure what that reference is to with the whole boatyard thing, it's also connected with the choice to call them the post-mechanists. So if you know anything about literary criticism and literary genres, I'm personally, I went to college initially as an English student. I'm not saying that I'm great at writing or anything, it just happened to be what I went into. So I happen to have had a lot of literary analysis classes, and if you know much about literary analysis, you may kind of get what I was going at then with the whole postmodernist, post-mechanist thing. Now there's my clumsy attempt at empty bottles, because I could have made whole new objects, but I didn't know how. So I basically just took an existing texture and made it gray, and then made the bottles semi-transparent. I really hoped that it would look like they were kind of empty. I was actually really proud with how this whole apothecary apparatus turned out. I keep calling it, I was very avid in calling it the apothecary apparatus, because I felt that sounded really cool, and yet everyone else calls it the apothecary thing, or the apothecary machine or something. I'm just like, no, it's the apothecary apparatus. But I know Fen was kind of like, it's called humoralism, which sounds strange because it's like, haha, the humoralism, it's like humor, haha. Well, yeah, I guess I was just kind of on my high horse and like, hey, this is a reference to a real thing, aren't I clever? Yeah. But actually, I'm still really pleased with how this whole thing turned out, the machine there. Now, unbeknownst to the player, right in front of you where I was looking just before I started reading the book, there's probably not 12 to 16 invisible markers. There might be more than that. Because this game mostly relies on pseudo-scripting. That is, if you were clever, like Nameless Voice or one of the other big names, you could just program your own scripts. But I don't know how to program very well. So, and I don't, even if I did, I wouldn't know how to create new script libraries for this game. I suppose I could ask, but getting an answer out of Nameless Voice can be kind of tough sometimes. Anyway, So most of the things that are done are either done using script modules created by folks like Nameless Voice, such as his NV script library. Basically, it's a bunch of scripts that can be that kind of a general use. They're very flexible, so that you can use them to do a bunch of other things. Hold on, let me break this on an aside to say I very intentionally placed that piece of loot there to make sure that the player had to crouch down to get it. I actually had to modify the throb distance on it to make sure you couldn't get it while you're standing up. That way the player had to crouch down to get it, which guaranteed that the player would accidentally highlight that hidden floor panel and see it. So, yeah. And then those boxes set on top of it was just because I thought it'd be pretty cool that it'd be blocked. So if you try to come from below, like if you were down inside the mines and you tried to climb up that ladder, you couldn't. Because if you tried to open that trapdoor from below, it would be blocked by the crates. So you have to come up top and get off the crates from the top of that trapdoor, and then you can use it. It's just another way where I tried to create kind of a little gameplay gimmick, and I don't regret that. I think that kind of thing turned out well. And there's the mask taunting. But anyway, my point with the scripts was that to make that apothecary apparatus work with the very simple pseudo-scripting available, it basically requires a lot of logic chains, which are a bunch of objects linked together. And each of those objects, markers in my case, markers are basically objects that are invisible, and they're used to carry scripts, stuff that the player shouldn't see but that are working kind of behind the scenes. So each of those logic chains are like it checks, the first one of the chain, I believe, checks to see if there are enough drops in the apothecary apparatus to create a new thing. And there's a new chain for each of the things that can be created. So the first thing in the chain checks to see if something can be created or not. Then there's a few pieces in the chain that respond to if it can be created. And then the last one in the chain, I believe, deals with subtracting the drops if something is created. And the final one kind of resets the process. It's a little complicated, and I was kind of proud to have made it. I'm sure that an experienced coder like Nameless Voice would think that it's child's play, but come on. I'm not too experienced with it, so I was pretty pleased with what I made. Now, the whole thing with the mask there kind of taunting the player, that's another thing that I thought of very early on with the development process of this level. Basically, I'm gonna discuss the origins of this level once we get to the place that I first built it in. I'll explain it then. I chose to have this. I know Fen was a little confused, but I think he understood the purpose later on of why I put that thing that looks like a door switch. Well, it is a door switch there, and then made it unfrobbable. It's because I wanted the player to have to come back for this book, but I didn't want the book to just appear there because then the player may not know where it is, or just may not understand what they were going for. So I kind of made the compromise of putting the book there so you can see it, make it unfrobbable. The idea is that the player will remember that it's important, but Garrett wouldn't know that it's important right away, so why would he take this one particular book out of all the other books? You know, personally that bothered me, because I'm like, oh, we shouldn't take this one book, because to him it's just some book. Why should he care? So only after he hears that it's important is he able to go back and get it. If I was willing and able at the time to make new objects, I probably would have had a whole shelf object with a bunch of books in it, and that could have been one of the books sitting there, and it could have been unfrobbable, and that would have been no big deal because you'd see it and you wouldn't think it was out of the ordinary either. But then once you heard that it was important, then you could come back for it, and that would make more sense. But with my limited options at the time I was making this, that was kind of the best I could do. So here's the whole puzzle with this. You have to heat or leave cool certain things, either bile, phlegm, or blood, depending on what that humoralism said. And then the medicinal alchemist tells you the combination you need. It's actually, I don't know, I still think it was a pretty clever puzzle. It's basically, these things are just renamed buttons, basically, those 3 bottles. I used, they're just like a potion, either invisibility or a slow fall potion bottle. And I just gave them different textures so that they're more clearly different colors. And then I made a whole bit of backstory for it and all that good jazz. But it's basically just a 4-digit combination. So you can imagine the blood being a 1 and the green one, I think that's the bile, being a 2, and the blue, the phlegm, being a 3. You know, so it's just different combinations of those 3 numbers. And I pretty much go through mostly the only combinations I could, with there being only 3 things in a 4-digit line in a row like that. So there's always 2 of those things, like blood or bile or phlegm, being used twice. And from that, you can pretty well infer what the combination will be, as long as you know what the 2 unique elements. Well, if you know what it starts with and what it ends with, basically, you should be able to tell what the combination is going to be. And I believe also you need to know if there are any other special ones in there. Like, you know that every combination is going to use all 3 of them. So let's say you know it's going to start with blood and end with bile. Well, you know it's got to be blood, something, blood, and then bile. And then from there you can decipher the rest. I believe that there also it also explains what that second digit, or that second option, would be as well. So that was the thinking with that puzzle. It's probably more confusing now that I explained it than it would be if you just figured it out from the readable. But I don't know. It's the first puzzle I really ever made that truly has a logical basis like that, and I was pleased with it. Now, let's talk about some of the more interesting stuff happening on screen right now. That guy walking through the wall. Oh, I was pretty proud of that. But it still suffers from the fact that you can see that wall there that he walks through is just a hidden door. Now this readable here is going to be important after a bit. But for now, I'm going to keep talking about that really cool walking through the wall thing. Oh, and getting into this room right here, which is Brother Arnold's old offices, which clearly had been recently ransacked. Well, before this place got shut down anyway, it was clearly ransacked and locked. So something had happened here, and this letter just happened to be left behind. Now, this whole thing about the enclosed First Bank and Trust account numbers, I just kind of imply that there's some numbers here. So I realized that it kind of confused Fen, at least for a little bit, about where are those numbers? I didn't get any numbers. Well, let's just kind of pretend that there's some numbers there. I probably should have gone ahead and just added a page that had some numbers and BS on it, so that at least you wouldn't wonder if there was something missing. You may not know how it'd be important, but at least you wouldn't wonder if you were missing something. I don't know. Putting these crates here like this is for a reason. For one thing, I liked having this area broken out, that wall there, so you could get into these offices here, which are otherwise sealed off. You can get to them at a time you wouldn't normally be able to. So I liked that little part of it. The reason I made these crates so they had to be destroyed and they couldn't be picked up is because when I was testing, I realized that if they were reformable, it's probable that someone would pick them up and drop them down inside the hallway. They just set them out of the way. And then that Karis ghost AI thing might get caught on them, which would kind of ruin the effect of him walking all over the place. I know Fen even thought that there were more than one of them because he gets around so much. It seems like he's all over the place, which is pretty awesome. I always knew that there was just one, and I was never fooled by it, so I never thought that it could fool someone into thinking that there were more than one of them. But I'm pleased that it had that effect. Now, anyway, as for him walking through the walls, there is a possibility that AI could just walk through walls. There are a few ways that could be done. Now, in the fan mission shoot, the name's not coming to me. But there's a horror fan mission that Fan also Let's Played that had a case where there's like a, how do I want to say, there was like a painting on the wall, and then a ghost walks out of it, which was a really cool effect, by the way, and kind of walks through the air, then down onto the hallway that the player is in, and walks towards the player. Now, that was done by there once being a ramp that the AI walked on. Now, the Dark Engine determines where AI can move on a pathfinding database. So, when you want to process the level's geometry into something that the AI can use, you have an option called process or calculate pathfinding database. And based on the objects and the properties and the brushes in the level, the game then determines where the AI can move and saves that as a pathfinding database. Now, the player can't really modify that. It's just part of the mission's code. And as far as I know, you can't modify it directly. But if there's some change to the level, like let's say you have a brush somewhere that blocks an AI when you calculate the pathfinding database, and then you later take that brush out of the way so that the AI could move to that area. If you don't recalculate the database, the AI will still move as if that brush was still there. So let's say that there was a pillar in the center of a room, and you calculate the pathfinding database, and later on you remove that pillar, but you didn't recalculate it. The AI would be completely unwilling to move through where that column had once been. And that works the other way around too. For instance, I could have had like a tunnel in the wall that would allow the AI to move through it. Like maybe at one point it had a connecting tunnel right there, and then I computed the pathfinding database so that the AI could walk through that area, and then later on I took away the tunnel. The AI would still be able to move through that area, or at least it would try to. I can add a property to the AI making it non-physical, meaning that it wouldn't have any collision. It would just walk along the databases, almost like it was on rails. Now, to the player, it would look just like he's walking like normal, because the player doesn't realize that there's a database that he's just walking along, like a bunch of strings set, or rather like a bunch of breadcrumbs scattered along the level that the AI just always follow. When they have to get somewhere, they figure out what the shortest route of breadcrumbs are to where they need to get to. So they're just following the breadcrumbs, basically. And I could have used that method, but I don't like that, because then if I do a new processing, the AI forget that they can move through an area again. And I want to have the possibility of me forgetting that I'd wanted the AI to move through a certain place, and then me reprocessing it at the last moment. Then all of a sudden I release a version of the mission and the AI doesn't do what he's supposed to do. Well, so I went with another option that I kind of figured out on my own. I noticed that AI, when they open doors, like let's say they open a spinning door, you may notice that they don't, if the door hits them in the face, they don't get stuck on the door. Instead, there's a few moments where they can walk right through the door. So if an AI opens a door, it briefly becomes non-physical to the door and is able to walk right through it. And I took advantage of that by making basically sliding doors there that don't slide at all. So the AI is technically opening a door, and then it steps through it because it becomes temporarily non-physical, and then closes the door behind it. But since the player can't open the door, the player never becomes non-physical to that door. It always holds the player back like a wall, but the AI is able to move through it. So I found that to be a better option, although the only downside is, since I wasn't using really super high poly objects for those secret doors, the doors themselves they stand out very obviously against the wall. So if I could go back, I suppose I kind of spoiled the trick now, so it's not so mystical anymore. But if I was going to do it again, I'd try to make a new higher poly object or some other means of disguising the fact that there's a door there.
First, no parents, then no mentors, and now no friends. Why must you always be so alone, thief?
If you didn't hear the first word he said first, no mentors, I believe. No, first no parents, then no mentors, and now no friends. That's me referencing kind of the events in Thief 1 and 2. I guess I hadn't really discussed this yet, had I? But this mission was supposed to, with its story, it's supposed to kind of bridge Thief 1 and 2 and Thief Deadly Shadows. There's a point later on in the mission, if you get the right kind of ending, you'll be taken by a keeper to a book. This is kind of spoilers, I suppose, but spoiler alert, you'll be taken by a keeper to a book. And that book is supposed to be the book reference at the end of Thief 2, The Metal Age, where Garrett's like, all this, it was written, and then he says, show me, and then the game ends, and you never hear what it was that he was shown, and then all of a sudden in Thief 3 Deadly Shadows, he doesn't say anything about a book, and he's never really shown a book, and that whole plot thread was kind of dropped. So basically this mission attempts to subtly pick up that plot thread, and basically the book he gets here, if you get the good ending, quote unquote, the good ending has him being told what's in the book, or just kind of hinted to. I considered having the book readable, but I really didn't have the guts to try and put down a canon explanation for what it was the prophecy was. Because if I had made something up, I'd basically be having to bridge the Thief 2 and Thief 3 canon stories. And I mean, it would have to be very brilliantly written and complicated, and it would just have to be perfect. I didn't want to take that risk of screwing it up. So I didn't have a readable that could be read, because I figured it'd be easier just to let it be in the player's imagination. And I guess that the problem is that some players may not realize that this mission is supposed to take place right after, well, not right after, but a little bit after Thief 2. I guess it's kind of hinted in the description, in the fan mission's description, but it takes place after Thief 2, The Metal Age, and before Thief 3 comes to pass. So somewhere in that point is when this is supposed to be happening. Now, there's some hints in that readable there of what needs to be done. And when I was playing this for the recording, I realized that I'd forgotten something important. So I'm going to go get it right now. There are a couple bonus objectives here that I thought were kind of interesting to add. It's just something I could have thrown in on the side for fun, and I thought, oh, why not? And I'm pleased that I did. It adds a little more intrigue and interesting depth to what can be done. And here I'm kind of hinting at, see, notice she says here, she wants evidence proving the thief's guilt on her desk within the week. So that's what this letter is. So you have to drop it right on her desk. There you go. That's a bonus objective complete. And there's another objective we're going to solve right here. I know Fenn tried to do this, but he tried to use the Arnold's letter on that when you really need to just drop it. It needs to touch it. That's important. And then you get to deliver the letter to his beloved. If you kept the letter, that would also be a bonus objective. It'd basically be you stealing the letter and keeping the bank information for yourself. In hindsight, I wish I wouldn't have added that, because that just kind of is a superfluous bonus objective that really means nothing. So once you deliver the letter, Arnold's haunt is no longer your enemy. In fact, he will fight for you. The only downside is he doesn't follow you, so you need to make sure you drop him somewhere where it's going to be useful, as I do here in just a moment. Trust me, that took a little bit of pseudo-scripting to get to work properly, but it was a lot of fun. Basically, instead of making a brand new AI for his haunt, he's basically just sitting out in a room somewhere where the player can't get to. And so it applies the properties that are necessary and then teleports him in when the when the skull gets destroyed. This is kind of how I intended him to be used, helping you fight these zombies and stuff. It was only when I was recording this that I realized, to my surprise, that he was unable to actually destroy these zombies. If I recall, the Hammerites in Gold, or at least in Thief 2 or something, I believe some of them were able to blow zombies up with their hammers. But I suppose this will do. This that blessed hammer, just tossing it onto the zombie, did the trick. There's multi-purpose objects for you. I really hadn't intended to do that, but as I was playing, I realized that'd probably work, and there you go, it does work. So, lucky me. That's one of the changes I made for the 1.0.2 version of this level, of this mission, that is. As of the 1.0.2, which again was made after quick modifications I made the night that I recorded this, now Arnold's Haunt should have holy effects on his hammer, so he should be able to destroy these zombies by attacking them, or at least so I hope. I realize also that this blessed hammer might be able to be abused. I haven't really tested going around and throwing it at zombies. It may be that it makes it super duper easy, but I suppose there really aren't that many zombie enemies, and tossing a weapon at them is kind of a clumsy way to go. So maybe it's not such a big deal. I don't know. I left it in just for the heck of it. And again, this is on the map down here for the mines. That area with the big tube, the big pipe there. That's part of the map that's looks like it's got a big rip in the center, like a big bunch of water damage. That's kind of a hint that you can't get through right here. Kind of trying to be a little subtle with it. I like that there's so many bits of gems and gold and silver down in these mine carts. That was kind of fun to place. I really kind of enjoyed making these mines overall, although I suppose that they can be a bit excessively mazy. But if you understood the map alright, I think it would be less of a big deal. Also, this in normal and maybe hard, right there, the area with the roots, there would be a key sitting right there, but that's not there in expert. That key is a key to let you into the further eastern parts of the warehouse. That is some of the ports we haven't been to yet. There are some doors that are locked, and that key would have gotten you into those areas. But as it is, there's only one key in expert that'll let you do that, and that was hinted in the readable with the foreman, which mentioned that we're over here at the far east, at that part of the map. But anyway, that was hinted at with the foreman saying that he was going to go down to the chapel to pray, and that's where that key is. Basically, he was down there, and that's how he met his fate. See, over there, down there, the SN, that's the chemical symbol for tin. So yeah, copper, tin. You know, I'm kind of spelling it out for you guys. Sorry about that. It's kind of tough to... I realize that if I put my cursor off screen, I'm not able to write anymore. That's where that pipe is, and that water damage place in the middle. So the arrows are there as if you had been able to pass through it, but then, since it's water damaged, you can't pass through there anymore. I actually kind of like how the map turned out overall. It was just a little... I don't know. Maybe it could have been clearer, but it's a puzzle. So... I guess that's kind of the point, figuring it out and all that good stuff. That remaining X with the question mark, that leads to the Burrick tunnels, which we'll find in just a bit here. And then that other arrow leads out from them. Here's again me getting my cursor off screen so I can't type. That was a little annoying. Now I made these the mines by basically creating kind of an X shape with some wedges and stuff, and I liked how it looked, so I kind of just lazily duplicated it a bunch of times, and that was the result. It was a pretty bland and empty mine to be honest. So I added those blocked areas and put some stuff here and there. And I think in the end, it's really not so bad. You know, yeah, it's kind of a maze, but that's sort of the point. I did add the map, the puzzle map, granted, but it's still a map that kind of explains how to navigate it. I think that, in spite of that, I'm pretty sure there's a part here that I missed, because there should be another zombie, one that's laying down. I don't think I ever see him in this video portion. I think there's also some more loot that I don't find, but that's just kind of how it goes. Putting my foot in my mouth. Now, explosive barrels aren't required for this. Fire arrows will also do the trick. Maybe that wasn't clear, but I kind of hoped that the player would guess that on their own. Oh wow. That little bit of apparition here, that's again the Karis figment. I call them figments. They're supposed to be symbolic. So Karis is like his mistrust, Garrett's mistrust. And there's another figment of the trickster of Constantine. That's supposed to be Garrett's greed. Notice that that water dripping out there is significantly greater flow than it was earlier when we were down here and picked up that other water arrow. That's because now the main water is flowing. So that's just kind of a little hint that you've made a change and that something's happening. There are also a few places, I believe, that have kind of a pumping sound or a water flowing sound to let you know that there's been a change. I'm not sure what they are offhand. But anyway, so I was trying to be a little symbolic here with the whole greed and mistrust thing. So Constantine represents Garrett's greed because his great downfall in Thief, the Dark Project, was that he was blinded by his greed, so he kind of went along with Victoria and Constantine, even though Constantine was kind of creepy and it was kind of a iffy thing to begin with. He just kind of he was willing to ignore probably his better, I'm sure, the warning bells I'm sure that he had in his head, and just go with it because of the promise of 100,000 whatevers. But, so I felt that greed kind of epitomized what his issue was in Thief, the Dark Project. And as for Thief 2, I'd say his biggest issue was just that he didn't trust Victoria enough to go with her plan right away. So as a result, he lost someone who... I don't feel like Victoria and Garrett ever had a romantic relationship. I mean, some think so. I never really thought so. But I think that they did have a good... something akin to a friendship budding. At least the most genuine thing that Garrett's ever had to a friendship, because while the two were just partnering out of necessity, they had once been enemies, and she did kind of take his eye, but I felt like there was a little bit of mutual respect to some degree, or at least maybe she had some respect for Garrett, and he slowly was starting to develop some respect for her, even though he had lots of caution, but I feel like she was still the closest thing he ever had to a true friend, because she had nothing really to gain from him. She wasn't trying to use him, aside from the fact that she needed his help to stop Karis's evil plot and stuff. So his mistrust was kind of his downfall, because due to his mistrust, the closest thing he had to a genuine friend, met her demise. Now here again, this is me using this blessed hammer to deal with a zombie. I never really, I guess I didn't think to test this, so I'm not sure if this hammer would kill an upright zombie or not. I'm kind of hoping not, and if it does, hopefully no one thinks to do that, because it'd probably be a bit too easy. But, oh well. If it is that way, it's just how it is. By the way, on easy, I'm pretty sure, well, on normal, I'm pretty sure that that particular zombie has a key to the warehouses on his belt. But if I'm recalling now, I think that there's a key there in the chapel and near that one root on normal, but it's not. But the one on the root isn't there on hard, and the one on the root and on the zombie aren't there here on expert. Only the one in the chapel is. So it kind of, it's a little variance of difficulty. Also, in the lower difficulties, there aren't as many enemies, I believe. Now, if you're wondering what I was just indicating right there with that readable, that was me pointing out that that big machine with the 2 gears is the thing that creates new children of Karis when the power is turned on. I was kind of pleased with how it turned out, but I'll explain it later. I demonstrate how it works. That was kind of fun creating this little Burrick egg, but to be honest, it really wasn't too useful because the Burricks are immune to other Burricks, and of course Burricks can't kill zombies with their burps. So basically the only enemies that they'd be useful for would be the humans, which at this point in the level you've probably already dealt with them, so it's kind of pointless. Or later on in the level there are 2 ape beasts, a spoiler again, and really it's about the only thing that those Burricks are used for, so maybe it's kind of a waste, but it was just fun and cool to add them. This is the first time we've seen the shadows. They actually look kind of okay here. When in Fenn's Let's Play, the 1.0.1 Let's Play, they look very green, and they do kind of look green here too. They have kind of a tint to them. Now, that's not intentional. They're supposed to be gray. I believe that the actual texture I used was just solid black with the red eyes. I think I pulled the red eyes from some Dead X, which is like a Dramid expansion pack sort of thing. I believe I got that texture off of there somewhere. I don't remember offhand. But anyway, they're supposed to be dark. They're supposed to... If I really knew how to do it, they would have looked like they were made out of soot. If I could probably whip something up now that would make it look alright, but at the time I wasn't able to modify their model. All I could do was just tweak the texture, so that's basically all I came up with. I suppose I could have maybe made them invisible, and maybe added some particle effects at different joints so that you could kind of imply the shape, and it looked like they were smoke or something. That may have done the trick as well, but it's just not what I happen to do. And they are supposed to be shadows, I guess. I think I referred to them as shadows. But here's a little glimpse into an area you can't get to yet. I know that kind of frustrated Fenn when he played, because he's like, why is he showing me things I can't get to? Well, and yeah, it is kind of a tease for later, and maybe it could be a little bit frustrating because, these areas are pretty far apart. It's like right there, but it takes you a good 3 to 5 minutes to actually get to the other area if you were to run there from here. So, yeah, maybe a bit of a tease, but I felt it was helpful as far as level design went, because it was a tease, It was kind of giving him a glimpse of what was to come, and kind of a denial and reward thing. Now, I really enjoyed making this area down here. It took a few revisions because I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I really liked what I came up with basically having no light in any of these rooms. Well, almost no light in any of these rooms, except for just a lot of very bright lights coming up from the lava below. I think that turned out really well. I miss a bit of loot here now that I'm watching this. I realize over there to the left of the camera right here is a spot behind those stairs, which should have has a little bit of loot in there, but I guess I missed that here. I didn't think to go back and get it. Oh well. It's just how it goes sometimes when you're actually doing the recording. You don't always think of everything. And this certainly isn't a 100% loot run. In fact, it's basically just enough to get my objectives. But it is hard to find the loot, and I'd recommend using a walkthrough if you're trying to get everything. I doubt I could even find it all without a walkthrough. It's been so long since I made it. Well, a year, but it's enough to forget. Now this little coffin here, as soon as you touch it, it starts to sink into the lava, as you saw, and then after a little bit it'll come back up. That's just to give you a little bit of a time limit, as you had to grab that last fire arrow. It's entirely what it was for, just to make it tough to get that fire arrow. And I like how this area turned out here after all the hot red colors from the lava, to suddenly have this area that's kind of cool and grayish blue. I thought that turned out well, as did this break in the wall. I'm just pleased with how it went. I'm not ashamed at all of using those traps as a quick gimmick for a bit of cheap gameplay. You know, nothing wrong with that now and then. It's kind of what Bone Horde was almost entirely based on, so I'm just getting me a little slice of the pie. And as for this yin-yang symbol, whew, that thing was tough to make. I can't even explain offhand how it was done. It was a little difficult, though, just because it just was, trust me. Now, this dripping water here is holy water. Now, maybe I should have had a little stronger so the effect was a little more obvious. And it doesn't really help you too much unless you're very patient with it, I suppose. And maybe that may be for the better. But if you do it right, you can get the zombies stuck in that area and they'll blow up from the holy water. So it's supposed to be like a curtain that would allow them not to pass. And this thing was intentionally made so that if it hit lava, it would blow up. That's not normally that way. I did that on purpose. And if you're wondering what it is, it's a bit of leftover debris from one of those mechanist saw blade robots. Here you've got a new texture I added there. I was pleased with how that came out. She really does look like she's had some bad burns. But basically there was a Mechanist expedition down here. Don't ask me how that worker bot got down here. But he ended up in the lava, so just a glimpse that they had been here before the player. Even though the one tunnel couldn't be entered because it was still blocked off with the X, but you know, there was the other tunnel that they could have gone through, the one with the overturned cart. So I suppose that's how they got here. As for this area itself, I imagine it to be kind of a tomb of warriors or guards or something defending this young princess who has the crown down here. We'll be getting to that in just a moment. I was pleased with how that little poem came out. Same with these obelisks on either side of the tomb. I like how that particle effect came out. I was very pleased with that. It looks like it's frozen or something. It's very cool.
Archaeologist sounds so much more dignified than the thief.
Now it's important that, well, first of all, Fen points out that it's kind of disappointing that this is just ye olde thief crown. And he's right. But that's because, as I've said, I'm just not willing to use someone else's objects because it feels like it'd be cheating. And at the time of me making this, I wasn't able to make new objects, so I was limited to what was available. So that's why it's ye olde thief crown. And yeah, there we go. There, it finally died. And I probably should have just bit the bullet and used new objects, but oh well. Hopefully I get over that mindset eventually, because it's kind of a hindrance. Anyway, that line that Garrett said, archaeologist sounds so much more dignified than thief. That was... It's important that I went to get that crown now. That's very intentional, because if I would have happened to have grabbed the mask first, that is, if I'd have gone for the main objective first, instead of him saying that line, the mask would have said a line. And I think that I get 3 of the 4 side objectives without the mask, and then the last one I intentionally wait to get with the mask because I want to demonstrate how it has lines. Now that required a little bit of complicated pseudo-scripting as well, a number of hidden markers that are linked up to create kind of a logic circuit for, oh, has the player gotten the mask yet? If not, then use line A. If so, then use line B, you know. That's a little more complicated than that. The logic isn't more complicated than that, but setting it up is more complicated than that, unfortunately. It leads to a lot of object waste, which is, in this is using the original, well, this was made using the original Dromed 1.18, the 1.18 version of the Thief 2 Dark Engine, not with the 1.19 patch that was just recently released, of course. So there was a limit of like about 1,400 objects or so. It's kind of a soft limit, so I think I upped it to around 1800 or so. But I was pushing the limits. And that's why, and it's in no small part because I use so many of those complicated logic circuits with all those objects required. If I hadn't done that, I probably would have been better off for objects, but I started to really hit the limits. In fact, this mission basically was down to maybe 50 to 100 more brushes or objects could have been possible, maybe less. So I was really nudging the limits of what would have been allowed. If I'd have gone too much further, this game basically would have broken. Oh, he saw me a little bit there. Now, I could have just entered from where I was into that one area, but I want to show another way in. I intentionally made this so that, aside from being able to get in through the tunnels like I almost did there, you could have broken the wall as I did and then shattered this window and gone through. Here I kind of barely avoid mistrust here. Now, with those with those areas with the crates that were unfrobbable on the other side of that one wall, part of it was the idea that you'd be in a rush. It's the same with locking this door here. I knew that this guy would be passing through here, so anywhere around where he passes through the wall, it's intended that the player might get stuck on doing something so that there's kind of a shock when he shows up or a rush to get away from him. I was very, very pleased that it worked on Fen. Fen was pretty scared when Karis walked through the wall into his face when he was not expecting it at all. That was very, very satisfying. I'm pretty sure I missed a piece of loot in here. There should be another piece behind that other object, but I forgot about it. Also, it doesn't really make much sense that the stuff in there is moving and ticking, but I just did it that way. Kind of senseless, and if I'd go back and change it, I'd do that. The 1.0.2 fix wasn't meant to change those things like that. It keeps the mission exactly the same, just changes some of the properties of things. So I didn't change that, even though I could have.
Friend, awaken thyself. Something
Do mine eyes see aright?
Aye.
The builder shields his faithful servants. Karis shields us.
Sound the alarm! Ring them out!
Karis, strength to me.
I was very, very pleased with how that turned out. I'd say that does a good job of explaining what happened to the mechanists here, as well as being one of my first times doing some... Oh, you can hear another mask aspect around here somewhere. As well as being one of my first times of doing sound editing. Oh, excuse me. Now, that was made by just putting together... Oh, here's the vine arrow that Fen could not find. I'm sorry. I should have done something else to make them more visible. Maybe make the vine arrows, instead of just being... Oh yeah, these guys go through here sometimes. Pardon me. Maybe instead of the vine arrows being green like moss arrows, I should have made them stand out a bit by being brown. You know, probably would have been wiser. I wanted them to come off of vines though, because I'm like, oh, a vine arrow shouldn't just be in a mossy area like the grass on the floor here. It should be in it should be off of a vine. It's a vine arrow. But the downside is that I kind of had a awkward way of hiding them, since they are often just sticking on top of those vine objects. It can make them pretty hard to see unless you're kind of looking for them. So I suppose it's kind of a flaw on my part. Oh well, it happens sometimes when you're new at this whole thing. And even the most experienced folks make mistakes sometimes. So, What was I going to talk about? Oh, well, anyway, here's one of the areas where the player could have gone if I hadn't already turned on the water flow. Behind this corpse here. Back here is this drain. Now that drain would be open, which would allow you to climb a ladder down into a big boiler that's down on the chapel level. But since we turned on the water, that route is closed to us. There's a moss arrow I missed. Anyway, but as for that little, oh, just a moment.
Once a hungry child, now a hungry man. Riches will never satisfy your hunger, thief.
Yeah, I was trying to do like a psychological thing here. Whether it worked or not is up to your opinion. I think it turned out alright, though. But anyway, with that little sequence of those... Oh, shoot, I'll have to wait a moment again.
How does it feel to have your life written, thief? Does it disturb you to know that you're an agent of fate?
I think that'd be kind of uncomfortable for Garrett to know that, I mean, all this stuff he's done, all the things he's accomplished were prophesied to be. I think that it's kind of hinted that he may feel a little miffed at that or a little uncomfortable by it, but the game never directly addresses it, but I suppose he doesn't really soliloquize too much about what he thinks on things anyway, at all, so... He probably... I mean, I think he'd have every right to feel kind of uncomfortable with the idea that everything he's done, all the accomplishments he's made, were written in some book centuries ago, and he's just kind of a pawn fulfilling his role. You know, it really kind of diminishes his greatness. At least you'd think it would to his eyes. It'd be kind of a blow to his ego, wouldn't it? Anyway, as you read the Parable of Smith, if you care to, I will talk about that little sequence with those AI. I edited that all together in a single sound file, so those characters talking with the servant, well, there's a servant there who's releasing the rust gas, and there's the two mechanists. I edited all that together from the sound files in Thief 2, and it was all put into one single sound file to make sure everything was timed perfectly. And from that sound file, I then went back and created the visual aspect of it, trying my best to time it so it all fit together. I'm very glad that the AI and Thief don't have some kind of lip sync, because I think that would be really, really tough to make work well. I'm glad that they're like, almost like marionettes, just move around, and you can just get them to make certain motions, and then you have to imagine that what they're saying and what they're meaning by their motions. It's a big boon for me as a level designer and developer as far as FMs go, because it's just easier and it allows a little more I don't know, maybe it's just easier. Maybe that's all there is to it, because I suppose if you had to make everything yourself like you would be in the Source engine or something, I suppose there'd be more room for like nuance and some subtle movements and stuff, while here you just have to kind of work with what you got. But I don't know, there's something to be said for kind of taking the elements that are at hand and making something great with them. And there's also something to be said for me making excuses because I'm too lazy to create my own animations, which is extremely difficult for the Dark Engine. Very, very, very few people do it, even among the top amazing FM creators. And there's a good reason for it. It's just very unintuitive, very complicated, and personally, if I have any choice, I'll probably avoid ever fiddling with that stuff unless I take a crazy pill one day and just really feel like spending a couple weeks trying to figure out how to do something and pulling some hair out from frustration in the process. Now, that From the Sage's Parables is kind of a hint that that book was actually written, or may have been written, by Sage, who you may remember us seeing an office belonging to a guy named Sage earlier. So a lot of these guys are connected. Some of the names that are mentioned in this Mechanist area are mentioned elsewhere, so kind of keep your eyes open. I tried not to throw the names around too willy-nilly. One last time, back to that rust gas animation. Most of those animations were ones that lasted quite a while. There's a bunch of different pre-made motions that you can use, but most of them are intended for, they were intentionally made for just short conversations, while the ones I use are longer, and most of them were probably taken from System Shock 2. When I watched Finn's Let's Play System Shock 2, which I hadn't seen when I made this, by the way, that's when I kind of realized where some of those came from, like the dying animation from that servant. But I think I used it to pretty good purpose. It certainly seemed to fit well, and I like how it turned out. Also, it was the same with the guy who kind of ran in, looked around, then turned and ran away. It was perfect for that. Now, Fenn pointed out that this seems like kind of a misleading thing here, because it says, you know, if you have another infestation of pitcher plants, burn them out. And yet, they don't do anything if you try to hit them with a fire arrow. Now that, in the 1.0 version of the original version, that, I believe that note was still there, but it didn't make mention of that, or may not have even been there at all. Oh, by the way, if you hit this plant with water arrows, it'll give you moss arrow for every water arrow you spend. So that's kind of being hinted by that readable there. And similarly, that pitcher plant being burned out is supposed to be hinted at there. But when I made the 1.0.1 update that actually added that readable and added that functionality, because it wasn't there in the 1.0, I only added it in the 1.0.1 because I thought it'd be neat. Because I think someone must have pointed out that, you know, it kind of sucks to hit those buttons. And I was like, okay, well, you know, maybe I could have them burned down. I'll put a readable in this little hidden secret garden area thing, suggesting also that there was kind of some dissent among the old mechanists and, you know, whatever. But for whatever reason, I either forgot to save the modification that made them able to be destroyed by fire, or I forgot to save it or something. I either didn't include it or I didn't save it, but whatever the case, it just didn't get put in, so it looks like I'm totally jerking the player around, but that was not all intentional. So I actually created, it's not really a bug per se, it's just a mistake. There aren't too many true bugs in 1.0.1, so the 1.0.2 doesn't really fix bugs exactly. It's more that it adds functionality that was supposed to be there in the first place, or expands a little bit on the properties of how things work, just a tad. Now this whole Mechanist area here, when I first made it, I aligned everything based on the fancy Art Deco textures that you can see in like Angel Watch. But I soon realized that Art Deco looks like crap. I mean, I'm sure it looks okay when used very smartly, and I'm not always the smartest level designer when it comes to textures. I tend to build around textures. Like, I just take a texture, I slap on a wall, and then I kind of fit the wall and the room so that it accentuates the texture. But it's much better if I use the texture to my advantage. Like, I keep the texture in mind and then build a creative room that uses the texture as maybe just a highlight instead of glorifying it. That's just a better way to go. And if that doesn't make much sense, an example would be like, maybe one of those Art Deco textures has like a border that has a nice zigzag grain, but the rest of the texture doesn't look all that great. There's no reason why I couldn't just use that texture for the zigzag and then use a different texture for the rest of it. But when I built this anyway, it didn't really occur to me, and I just wanted to stick with one kind of thing. It was either laziness or just amateurity, whatever, on my part. And just another thing I got to work on. I'm not really, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like, oh, I suck, pity me. But I'm just pointing out what I see and what I recall to be some of my flaws for the sake of, I grow over time as I build more and as I observe what I've built. And I think that's a good thing to have, the ability to see where there is room for improvement and to admire where things were good to begin with. Now, instead of using the Art Deco, I use this green brick. And I wish I hadn't, because almost all the warehouse thus far has been the kind of orangish reddish brick. and then all of a sudden there's this green brick out of nowhere, and it doesn't really make much sense. So it probably would have been better if I'd have used a unique texture there, but again, I didn't really want to get into that, so it was kind of the only texture that I found that was kind of different. It certainly stood out from the red brick anyway, so that was my logic behind using it, just that it was different. But, I don't know, I think that the fact that it stood out always kind of bothered me. The fact that it didn't really match the rest of the warehouse's building materials, that kind of irked me, but I just sort of went with it. So, yeah. I never heard anyone really complain about it, but it always kind of bugged me. A reason why I picked the green brick in particular is because this area, although it may or may not be too obvious now, has a very greenish yellow color to it. It's meant to be kind of sickly and deathly. And a lot of the warehouse area, in fact, has lights that kind of have either a bluish on like some of the stained glass windows and stuff, either a kind of a bluish light, which is supposed to be kind of a haunting, creepy color, or a yellowish greenish, which is, aside from also being kind of creepy, also kind of implying the death that happened there and giving it kind of a otherworldly, strange, off-kilter feel, or at least such was the intent. Now here's the long letter by poor brother Wilhelm that got just tossed in the trash because he's all alone, unfortunately. There's a lot of hints in this, and in fact, I tried to put a hint or some purpose behind pretty much every readable in this mission, and I don't really regret any of the readables. Some of them may have been able to stand another round of editing, and in the 1.0.2, I actually edit a couple of the readables just to clarify a couple of the changes I made, so they're a little less misleading. But I think that overall my choice of using these was sensible. Now I know Fen once asked why I used this with the, looks like there's a scrap of paper over a page. I'm not sure if this is intended to like be highlighting a part of the page, but I use it to be like a piece of paper that was slipped inside of a book. So with the herbalism book, it's supposed to be like he had written some notes on a slip of paper and stuck it in the book. And in this one, it's like, I suppose in this case, it's more like it's highlighting part of the book. I guess I didn't want to just repeat the same kind of book art all the time, so I tried to vary it up a little bit. Although I suppose it probably doesn't bother. It doesn't bother. Bother plus bug equals bugger, I guess. It doesn't bother as many players as it did me as I was developing. And I could have added new book art. It's not too easy because you have to stick to the palette being used in Thief 2, which is very yellow and doesn't have very many colors in it. So it's definitely got to look like parchment, or else it's not really going to do the trick. But I just didn't go with that. In here, I thought I was caught when I was recording, but luckily, no. You can see, clearly has a greenish tint, but that was not intended. That's a result of gamma, basically. I really, really love how things turned out down here. You can see here that there's a candle on the other side of that stained glass window. And I really love how these statues, which had been hinted at throughout much of the, like in the office areas, there you can still see some of these statues to hint that it had been a Mechanist-run warehouse, and then of course there's the Mechanist stained glass and stuff. But I really like how the shadows work, and Fen commented on that too, and I was really proud with how it turned out. I also love how this big gear looks, the altar gear, in front of that stained glass window there. I actually, I'll explain this actually in just a moment. I was really pleased with how this readable turned out too, particularly this part. Now the holy breath is meant to be, the breath of the builder, which is also another name for rust gas. So basically everyone, all the mechanists who were here died from the rust gas, because it was like there was a contained breach from the one servant and any other servants that were down here. And so that readable hints that you can destroy these shadows with light. That's basically the only way to kill them, too. I'm pretty sure that they're immune to holy water and basically everything else. They gotta be killed with flash bombs. Or flash mines. Now there's also a hint of, with that, I think I'm trying to find it right now. Yeah, that readable by, or maybe not, but that readable by Wilhelm, he mentions that, I think this readable right here too also says that you gotta sprinkle the holy water on the gear, but also the blessed hammer will work. That's another, that was a readable given to Wilhelm on his bed. I think I just leave the hammer there, don't I? Oh well. That's basically what it was intended to be used for. Its ability to destroy zombies is just kind of a accidental, additional little quirk. Because zombies happen to be... I made it so that when the gear detects holiness, and holiness is a property that...
You won't need that anymore.
He won't need that anymore, he said. Yep. Now, the holiness is a property that can be applied to things. In this case, the gear looks for the holiness property, and it responds to it. They're called sources and receptrons. I'm not really going to get into it, but basically... Oh, and see, that's where that one guy died. The foreman must have died there, because that's where his key is. That's where he went to pray, and he never came back. And then there's a secret area. But, anyway, it listens... Let's put it this way. It listens for a certain volume of a property. And in this case, that property is holiness. And when it gets that amount of a property, then it responds in a certain way. And in this case, the gear listens, quote-unquote, for a certain amount of holiness. And once it detects that amount, then it responds by opening that door down there. That the door that gives you the Amulet of Inspiration. Now, in order for that to... It just so happens that the Holy Hammer also is using the same property, so they work interchangeably. Also, zombies respond by taking damage to the holiness property. And here's me just admiring how beautiful that looks, because I really do think that looks gorgeous. I went for kind of a creepy ambiance here. I initially had kind of the Gregorian chapel sounding oh kind of thing, because that's so awesome, but I decided to cut that out because there's no one alive down here anymore, so I want it to be more creepy with the whole shadows and stuff rather than anything else. So that lets you know that the water pressure was turned on. If it wasn't, then that thing would have been off, but that gauge is to the full right to show that the water pressure's on. And there's another aspect of the mask over there, and that's locked because I turned the water on. So what you gotta do is you gotta press that button and basically just be patient. I set up this little scene here. You hear the sound effects ramping up, and then it's like the boiler's slowly building up pressure, and then as it gets more pressure, these generators turn on and the lights turn on with them. So if you're standing here waiting, it gets more and more dangerous, because as more lights turn on, there's less and less shadow you can hide in. That was the intent anyway. So you just gotta wait for that to end, and then flip that switch, and that activates the main power. And you can see it here with this conveyor, which is now moving bits of old rubble. You can't pick any of this stuff up. It's not meant to be picked up. It's just for show, to show that something's changed with you turning on the main power. I also never really demonstrated from above, but you can fall down from above to this area where clearly the ceiling's collapsed a bit and part of the mine has kind of fallen in. I like how that turned out as well, with the cart that's been kind of covered up. That was cool.
Fate has greater plans for you, thief. You are a cog in the wheels of history, obliviously fulfilling your purpose.
Hopefully you could understand that alright. I know that it was a little drowned out by the sound effects around us. Now this switch, this whole backup thing to let you out here was intended for if you came up through the tunnels, but there are other areas that have those as well. There's another bay across the warehouse from this one that also has it closed. That has it closed like that, and the only reason it can open is just in case the player, well, aside from consistency, it also is just in case the player gets themselves caught. They don't get stuck. They'll find a way out. Now this machine over here on the left will create a new explosive barrel. If a barrel is destroyed, then it'll make a new one. Now this big thing is going to create a Child of Karis. Takes 2 minutes to make one, while the barrel is made in about 15-20 seconds, something like that. Just kind of patiently waiting for it to appear. The dial shows what the progress is at. See, there he is. Now as of 1.0.1, these guys are immune to water arrows and gas arrows, the whole boiler thing. But in 1.0.2, I removed that immunity because it was kind of stupid. I thought it would be cool, but it was kind of pointless, I guess. You know, why not let the player use water or gas arrows to deal with them if they want? After all, it'll just make unlimited more after another 4 minutes. It takes 4 minutes for a new one to be made, because 2 minutes for the machine to cool down. And if you look at the gauge, you can see it's moving back towards the left. And then as soon as it hits the far left, then the gears will start grinding again, and it'll start moving towards the right. And once it hits the far right, then that new Child of Karis pops out. But there are limited fire barrels to deal with them. It's just that the player may not always be around to get them as soon as they come out of the machine. So there's kind of a bit of danger there, because they might catch you when you don't have a fire barrel on hand, and then you're kind of in trouble. Luckily, I have enough time here to grab this and hurry over before the door closes on me. I had some fun making these machines do this whole spiel. Now, I use like a spool of wire and plate and stuff that seems like it's like, why did you use that? Well, basically just, again, because I wasn't able to make new objects, or unwilling, or whatever. So I had to work with what I had, and the closest thing that looked like copper to me was the copper spool. And the closest thing that looked like it'd be tin to me would be the plate. And then I could have them made in different ways, you know, so the copper was spun into a spool and the tin was pressed into a plate. And then you toss the two together to make the bronze. And there you go. It's been 2 minutes, so the machine's activated again. Now there's some pretty cool platform you can do here that I'm not sure how many people have tried this, but this is very intentional. Well, not that wasn't intentional. Me failing there wasn't intentional, but what you can do here was you can climb up here. You get a little bit of help. I probably should have put some gold or something up here, but I think at this point I had already put all the gold in the level, so I didn't want to put more. I just gave you a flash mine to do with the shadows instead. I believe there was something else I had been talking about, but I kind of forgot what it was. I apologize for that. Now, all these windows that can be broken, there's a good reason why they can be broken. I know that when Fenn tried to do the whole puzzle of opening the warehouse doors, the bay doors, he used these elevators all the time. And, you know, they are there for a reason to you know, that's an option. But there's supposed to be a better way. Well, there's supposed to be two better ways. Because you are supposed to be able to destroy those plants using the fire arrows. It's just my bad that that's not possible. It wasn't intended. It just got screwed up. So notice that watcher there is destroyed. I'm not sure why that is. Now it's supposed to be that the Karis and Trickster AI basically they ignore everyone except for Garrett, because they're supposed to be they're called figments for a reason. They're supposed to be figments of Garrett's imagination, basically. You know, they're figments of his guilt and his mistrust. They're kind of like interpersonal demons. But for some reason, and I'm not sure if this is a constant bug, because when I checked for the 1.0.2 update, I made sure that they had the correct properties. Oh, here normally I edit out my reloads, but I guess I didn't edit out that one for whatever reason. Must have missed it. Sorry. But, yeah. But I noticed when I was recording here that they apparently have attacked some other AI, which they shouldn't be. It's tough because there are only a few options for AI teams. Basically, an AI can either be good, which is to say they're on Garrett's team. They can be neutral, which is to say they don't care about anyone. Or they can be one of 5 bad teams. There's a bad 1, bad 2, bad 3, bad 4, bad 5. So you can have 5 different teams that are fighting each other who are also hostile to Garrett. But you can't configure any other loyalties within those teams. So bad 1 will always hate bad 2, and there's nothing you can do about it. So basically, I tried to make it so it seemed like there were some other loyalties going on, and I had to kind of do that by making those Figment AI ignore all other AI, but apparently somehow in this playthrough anyway that didn't turn out. I'm not sure if that's because I did play test this fairly extensively, and I know that the properties are set correctly, so it should be that the AI these Figments don't give a crap about other enemies attacking the player or anything like that. They should only care if they see the enemy, or excuse me, if they see the player, and then they'll engage the player, and that should be it. But they should never notice any other AIs or anything like that. But for some reason they kind of do. Not certain why on that. So here, those watchers came activated. The one got destroyed. I don't know why. So whatever. If you notice that happening in your playthrough as well, please leave a comment and let me know, because they're not supposed to do that. It's not really a bug per se, it's just it's not working as well as I'd hoped it would. Now that's the way I'm going to be going, 2813. And I did intentionally put these ceiling supports here so that you have to come down and around. That was intentional. Oh, I was going to say, this room here is actually the very first room I made in the game. It started out with this stack of crates I'm standing on right now and the one over to the right of me. And then from there it blossomed out to the room with the big gear. And that's how I intended people to move. I intended people to shatter those windows and use the crates to jump up into the windows. At least that's how I always did it when I was playtesting for myself. But anyway, so this is the first rooms that I made, and even after it started out with me just making this room here, and I put in these crates with like the lights inside of them, and I had some really cool, yeah, this is me showing that they can't be destroyed. Yep, sorry. But I made the crates with the lights in them, and I was showing off the cool shadows to myself. I'm like, oh man, I love the shadows they cast. It's so cool, and it is. I still really like it on the ground there. It's just really cool. So after that, I had this idea for like a vault on the other side of the room. So I made that big stack of crates, and then another room that had that vault in it. And from there I decided, oh, the player should have to get like a mask or something, and the mask like kind of taunts the player throughout the mission. So as of this area here, I basically knew what the mission was going to be about. But before that, I had no clue. I was just screwing around in the editor and just came up with this by chance. So a glimpse into how this was all made. And from here, I basically moved out towards the west, that is towards the area where the player starts. And then I went back and created the forest area, the area we're going to in just a bit, as one of the last parts. The basement and stuff was made about like the mines and the temple area and the ruins. Those are all maybe halfway to somewhere between halfway and 3/4 through development, those parts were all built. But I kind of knew that they were going to be there much sooner than that. So, had a little bit of an idea in my head, although I never drew anything down or nothing like that. Now, I know this can be a little confusing, because it's like there's some sparking wires up there, so it looks like this is broken. And I know it makes no sense, because it's like, well, this thing fell, why is it still working? Well, basically, I had no way to make... If I could have, I probably would have like made some object for like a wire, so it looked like it broke and fell down, but there's still a wire connecting it, so it doesn't look like it was completely broken, completely busted. But since I didn't make new objects, I didn't have that option, so I just kind of trusted the player would assume that it was, you know, the player would trust me as a designer that I didn't make them go through all that for nothing, you know. But I suppose that it's kind of up in the air whether what a designer is intending to do. Oh, and I didn't really mention it yet, but yeah, as of turning out the power, all those airtight seals rose, all those big gates. So now the player can move freely. That's part of the door, you know, every time a door closes, a window opens, that kind of thing. The whole teasing the player with the ability to do something
Didn't look that way from the outside.
before allowing them to actually do it. Now, that line was maybe kind of confusing, and I suppose it sort of is. That's another line recorded by Sly Fox for me. That was supposed to basically hint that, because I figured the player may wonder, well, this place is filled with trees. How come Garrett didn't make any comment, or there's no mention that outside of the warehouse as Garrett was trying to come in, there should be like big trees popping out the top, right? Why doesn't it look like this from the outside? And that was just kind of a lame attempt for me to be like, you know, don't think about it. It didn't look this way on the outside, so it's all cool. There's a reason why no one expected the Spanish Inquisition here, okay? But, yeah, so that's that line. I can see why it'd be confusing, though. Maybe I should have thought of a better way of expressing that. But I didn't have enough brushes I didn't have enough resources left to build an outside. And I really didn't want to build an outside because building an outside is difficult. I experimented with it a little bit, and I was even considering making a separate level where you sneak into the crate. But I, in the end, decided just not to, because it was just a distraction for what I was trying to do, and no, I wanted to keep it to one level anyway. Here's me trying a couple attempts against these ape beasts with a little baby Burke, who sadly does not make it. Now that Will-O-The-Wisp, normally the Will-O-Wisps are basically elevators. They're running along a preset track. But that Will-O-The-Wisp, I built based off of the Dead X, the Andromeda expansion, quote-unquote, kind of a fan-made thing that adds some new AI, and this Constantine was part of it too. I basically copied him from that. So this Will-O-The-Wisp is actually an AI that can fly. It's pretty cool. And if you touch it, he'll zap you. Now, if you notice that Ape Beast just kind of stood in front of the Burrick and didn't actually attack him, that's a bug, which I fixed in 1.0.2. For some reason, his motions were set incorrectly. I think it's something related to me using part of the Dead X thing. Somehow I got something corrupted, but it's fixed now. Here you can hear the sole tree beast that's in this area comes out from me, and I deal with him with the help of frog beasts. It's lucky that Constantine didn't shoot anything big at me, because he can shoot basically a firebolt that will explode, and it would have killed me quite readily at this point. I think that was just a bug spray he shot at me, kind of like the bug beasts in Thief Gold. Now the reason he doesn't have a tail is because, well, there just wasn't a tail on the model, and motions and stuff are handled differently in Thief Gold. Because, you know, in Thief Gold there was the Ape Beasts who have tails, and Constantine has a tail, and all of a sudden here in Thief 2, you know, no one's got tails. Well, I'm pretty sure that's because they remade some of the motions, so the AI don't have joints and they aren't programmed to have tails anymore, so you just can't add the tails like they used to be. So it's just a limitation. I heard that there's a way you can kind of fake a tail on him, but I guess I didn't figure it out, so I didn't add it on there. Now, he also shouldn't have attacked that Burke. He should have ignored everything except for me, but obviously that wasn't the case. So I'm not sure why that is so. This guy is just a red herring. He's not real. I'm not sure why that's the case. He should be ignoring everyone except for Garrett, but obviously he didn't, so whatever. Hopefully that's kind of exclusive to this playthrough, a rare bug, because I did everything I could to make them ignore everything except for Garrett, and I double-checked it with the 1.0.2 update, but it is all set correctly as far as I can tell. And as with the spool, basically you've just got to drop that in there and wait for this to finish. Now you may be wondering why I had this other door here. If I'd go back and really change much on this, I wanted to avoid changing too much in the 1.0.2, but if I did change the actual mission itself, I probably would have made this door here clearly out of order, or maybe have it so that the numbers are so worn you can't see them anymore. Because I know Fen went through a lot of effort to try and open that door, jumping back, well, not jumping back and forth because he didn't think to do that, but he was riding the elevators back and forth to try and press the numbers. And it's very much intended that the player has to, the more important the door, the more times the player has to go back and forth. And I know that might seem like kind of a BS move, but if the player could destroy those pitcher plants, or if the player could jump back and forth between the windows like I did, I think it's really not such a big deal. If the player does ride the elevators each time, I can see why it'd be annoying, but I guess I kind of saw that as a kind of a consequence for not thinking outside the box of trying to jump through the window. Maybe kind of a prick move of me, I don't know. But I still sort of stand by that gameplay decision. I've, as of now, kind of denounced the 1.1 version, which removed the necessity to open them and close them, and open them and close them. Because currently, if you open one door, another one closes. That's intended to make it so you have to strategize where you're going unless you want to, open the buttons or press the buttons a ton of times. But you know what? In the end, I stand by that gameplay decision. I don't think there was really anything too much wrong with it. It is tricky unless you really think about it, but Here, this is me trying to find some more loot, because I don't really remember where it all was. I really, part of my decision in 1.0.2 to make those Children of Chaos so they can be destroyed by gas arrow and water arrow again is because you get so many gas arrows in this area, and yet by this point you don't need them anymore because you should have dealt with the guards already, and you probably just dealt with the ape beasts. So what's the point of getting gas arrows now? There's nothing to use them on. So if the Children of Chaos can be killed by gas arrow, then it at least gives them some kind of purpose. If that seems like silly gameplay design on my part, or level design, it was, I'll admit. I was just trying to find some way to encourage the player to climb and explore a bit. And, yeah. In the end, again, I think it was kind of a bit of wasting, a bit of giving the player too much reward. Should have made it more rare. I hand the player a lot of free equipment in this game, or this mission. It's still very difficult just because it's long, and things kind of have to be done in a certain sequence, and you have to figure out what you're doing. But, this is me going along trying to find where I put the vine arrows. Because I'll admit, I thought that there were more and that they were a little easier to see. I think I find one at the end here. Well, that's a moss arrow. But find one along here somewhere. Clearly not in the middle, but I tried to place them so that they could stand out. They wouldn't be inside of the... Yeah, see, there's one. That wasn't inside of it, but you would have had to be on the right side of the vine to have been able to see it. Oh well. Again, I probably should have had them be different colors so they'd stand out a bit, or do something differently. Maybe use the full vine arrow model so that they didn't just look like little moss arrow crystals. So instead that they'd have the full arrow shape, so they'd be a little bigger and maybe a little easier to see. There's a few things I could have done there, but I didn't. So waiting for this guy to pass on by, this figment of greed. Then I'll be going on, because there's one last mask aspect. Try saying that 10 times fast in this area here. And that's what I'm going for. It's important that you find all of these masks before you get the actual mask out of the vault, because if you don't, if you get the mask first, they'll all vanish.
Once you were betrayed, then you were the betrayer. You will be betrayed again before you find your purpose.
Now that's a reference to, in Thief Gold, you know, Garrett was betrayed. And in Thief 2, he kind of betrayed Victoria by turning around and leaving her when she really needed him. And that got her killed. And then the You Will Be Betrayed Again is referencing Thief 3, where he and the rest of the Keepers are betrayed before he finds his final purpose. In other words, before Garrett accepts the fact that in spite of all this running he's done, trying to avoid and keep away from the Keepers and, you know, tell them, you know, F you, I don't want your education, I don't want your self-control. In spite of all that, he finally came around and was like, all right, I'm the Keeper. All right, I'm good with it. And this is me looking around for one last bit of loot because I'm just a little bit off and trying to find one. Meanwhile, I'll discuss this forest area. I think it turned out all right, but it's very sloppy to build with forest with brushes like I did here. I like the way that the roots like curl over crates and all that kind of stuff, but I really probably should have if I had to go back and remake this level, I'd create objects for that kind of stuff, because when I use brushes, it creates a lot of very awkward polygons and a lot of just clumsy geometry, basically. And that drives polygon limits really high, which can cause crashes. And when I'm like rendering the level's geometry, it can create errors as I try to it tries to figure out how the light should fall and all that kind of stuff. So I decide here that I'm not going to worry about getting that last bit of loot yet. I'll go for it later. I'm going to go for the second bay at the moment. I almost fell my death there. That was lucky. See here again, the doors close when you switch to a different code. Again, intentional. It's not such a big deal when I'm jumping through the windows like this. Oh, I was going to discuss how I would have made that one door, that far bay door. I believe it looks like bay 4. Since bay 4 and 3 are connected, it's like, well, what's the point? Well, the basic idea was that if you were willing to do the extra jumps to put in the 4-digit code that requires you to go back, forth, 4 times. Because since I intentionally arranged numbers so that one was low, one was high, one was low, one was high, so you had to jump between there a number of times, as many times as you possibly could. The idea there was that you'd have to decide whether you want to just do it 3 times, and then you'd have to walk through the entire forest to get to the pressing machine, or you could put in the code for the door that's right next to the pressing machine and avoid the forest, but you'd have to do one extra bit of jumps to input the code. So there was some logic behind it. You know, it's just maybe kind of prick logic, I don't know. I had to read on the forums how to get these bellows working. The bellows exist a little bit inside Thief 2, but they're all screwed up in Thief 2. They don't work correctly. As soon as you start the game, those bellows fly off into space, and they don't pump up and down like they're supposed to here. Now again, that little area down there, here's what you want. The bronze control key. Oh, no, I believe earlier I said that there was a key down by those roots. If this was on normal or hard difficulty. No, I'm mistaken. There was a bronze control key there, not the warehouse key. So, if you're on normal, you can just find the key. You don't have to make it. Because it'll be down there by the roots. That's because there's a readable that references how Wilhelm lost the bronze control key. And on, I believe, hard and expert, or maybe just an expert, probably hard and expert though, you don't ever find it. You know, it's basically gone for good and you have to make your own. But on normal, you can find it, so you don't have to make one. So, another little difference there. I'm generally pleased with how most of this went. Like, I like how this hanging tower, or this how this hanging control station here turned out. And yeah, here there's like you can start the alarms, or the R1 resets the alarms. I know it's the Ramirez button, but at the time I made this portion, I wasn't even doing any texture editing for objects. This was before I tried that. I tried the few texture objects, or the few new object textures I did make. I made those later on in the development cycle for this mission. So at the time I did this part, I hadn't done that yet. And really, it'd be tough for me to write reset in on a button, you know, without basically making a new texture and changing the way that that texture is applied to that object. So basically I'd have to make a new object for it, or at least tweak an object, which I didn't know how to do. So I just hoped that the player would understand R probably meant reset. And if not, then it's very generous because it'll only force the player to have an alarm going for 1 minute. So it's really not so bad. That's also mentioned in a readable.
We meet at last, thief.
This part's pretty awesome. I'm going to be quiet.
Garrett, it's Victoria. Garrett.
Victoria!
Your twin vices of greed and mistrust have harmed yourself and your allies, thief.
You cannot run from life as you did from us, Garrett.
Plan is suicide, and I work alone.
Then it will be up to you, my good thief.
Victoria!
Your flaws can be your strengths, but only when tamed. Defeat your demons, overcome your weaknesses, and find your balance.
I'm pretty pleased with how that whole sequence turned out. That was something I decided pretty somewhat later on in the development cycle. I was like, oh, it'd be cool if there was like some kind of epic sequence there, and that's what I came up with. I like it. I got all the voices, of course, from cutscenes or from the game. Nothing there was done by Sly Fox. So, maybe it was a little clumsy, I don't know. Funny enough, there was no texture there. The texture on Artemis wasn't working there. I hope that's just me. Because also, earlier on, when I was in the Undertaker's office, there was also no working texture on a couple of those gravestones, which was also the case when I did my developer's commentary for Tribal Breeze. So I'm guessing that's just me. At least that's how I hope. So, I don't know. But that room where you go, the one where there's the awesome, cool, kind of creepy knocking, that room, maybe a little clumsily, but I tried to model it off of Garrett's room as of, not from Deadly Shadows, but in the Thief Gold cutscene, there's a Oh, and then you have to put those two together, and then that gives you the goblet of balance. Yep.
I think I deserve a pat on the back for that one.
Yep. And if you're wondering whether or not the keepers would actually be willing to pay for Garrett having stolen something, well, you know what? He told them that he bought it through legitimate means, so they're not aware that he stole it. Okay? It's okay. Okay. Okay, Fen. Okay. Okay. Anyway, I still really like how everything's kind of cracked and looking sort of half molten down near the lava. But anyway, I modeled that room off of Garrett's room in the cutscene from Thief: The Dark Project, the cutscene where Victoria takes Garrett to Constantine. That's also where I got that line, Garrett, it's Victoria. That's where I got that line from that cutscene as well. And then because the cutscene zooms into a window, and you can see inside of it a lamp or a lantern sitting on the table, and I don't think you see like a sword sticking in. You don't see a sword sticking in the wood there, but Garrett's holding like a dagger, so that's kind of what that's supposed to be. Here again, you can glimpse at what that was. You noticed, just a quick aside, you notice down there these things were falling into the lava. That's basically from this conveyor. This conveyor drops those bits of stone into the lava, and it's just an endless cycle. So it's like the machinery's running again, like it's mining once more. Basically, it's what's meant to imply. But by activating stuff again, Garrett's dredging up the past. You know, it goes along with the whole fighting his inner demons sort of thing. But yeah, so I did my best to kind of with the objects I had available in Thief 2, modeling kind of what Garrett's room looked like. So I think I get a little confused here, and I was like gonna go that way, but I'm like, oh wait, hold on a second, I actually want to go get the mask, I believe. I did switch. I could switch textures on models. That's what I did here, because normally, of course, these guys look greenish, and if you kill them, then it just has the default corpse, which looks greenish, which I probably should have given a separate corpse or whatever, but that's the texture from the workers, basically. But I always liked the way that texture looked with the bronze, so I figured, hey, if it's making brand new ones, you know, why not make them that way? At first, I was trying to make it so that these old disabled ones you see here could come back to life, and I could have pretty simply done that by just destroying the old corpses and making new models appear, or new AI appear, but for some reason I was all hung up on the inability to actually turn an AI on and off. I tried and I tried and I tried, but because I had initially had it so that that power could be enabled and disabled, on and off, on and off. Of course, in the final version here, it can only be enabled, and once it's going, it can't be turned off again. But since I couldn't do it that way, I just had it so that they stayed off all the time, and I stuck with the machine making new ones instead. But it probably would have worked alright too if I'd have instead had all those old ones kind of come to life, and sort of like that one creepy mission I mentioned before, but I can't remember the name of. It's really awesome though. Having so they're like all old and rusty, and they kind of squeak when they move. You know, that'd be cool, but alas. Here's me going for a restoration potion. See, there are two references here. One saying that blood needs to be heated for restorative effects, and bile needs to be heated for rapid regeneration. So basically it's saying bile and blood, but not phlegm. And if you do heat phlegm, it won't work. So then you got the code here. Yeah, see, it does tell you what all the parts are. So one thing repeats twice, and the other thing doesn't repeat twice. And you can figure out the sequence based on what order it gives you them in. That's it. That's all the sap you get. You only get 18 drops of sap. So, as Fen observed, it's like a post-loadout puzzle-based store thing. I don't know. I'm pleased that it's in there. I'll probably do something like that again sometime. Maybe a little simpler. I don't know. We'll see. Now, the reason why you can't get up from down there, well, you can if you have a vine arrow. But the idea is that there's sometimes we may want to just drop down and get in there, so it's kind of a one-way thing until you find a vine arrow. Again, another way of trying to control the player's movement so that the player is diverted to go certain places at different times. You know, kind of making areas open up and just. It felt right for the gameplay.
You've endured much to acquire me. Do you enjoy being the pawn of others, thief?
Now, the reason I chose to get this so late in the game, although I could have grabbed it much earlier and done this whole bit much earlier, I wanted to show how... oh, there goes the alarm. Consider this a demonstration of how the alarm works. Just an alarm, that's all. It freaks out AI who hear it, that's all. But, I wanted to show what Garrett's lines were on those first 3 side objectives I completed. Now, there's one more I haven't gotten yet, the Tear of Maw. I could have gotten it, because I was already at that area, but I intentionally held off for now, because I believe now I'm going to go get it after I raid the Inner Vault. Because I may as well raid the Inner Vault because everything's already open, and why not? Get that over with. It's too bad that so much of these things don't really seem to pay. The side objectives, they pay pretty well, just because I was like, well, you know, if these are big deals, you may as well make them worth plenty of money. But things like the Inner Vault are only worth like 100 or maybe 200 gold. It's really not that much, all things said. So, that's just a downside of me basically deflating the currency or the loot amounts you'd get. So, I don't know. In my in my desire to reward the player with gold all over the place, I effectively made gold worthless. By the way, when as soon as the correct number is entered, that thing will start ticking. And if you try to flip it up and down, the light won't turn on unless a correct code is entered. The flickering wires, while being confusing, I partially discussed this before, but I think I forgot to go the whole way with it. I can see how the flickering wires are confusing, but they're meant to be a quick indicator from you while you're standing up there on the catwalk or in that control area, that yes, you've entered a valid code. You can now go down and flip the switch, because I didn't want the player to have to try a code and then go down there to flip the switch only to find they entered it wrong once they were all the way down there already. So I have a little bit of mercy. Come on. Now in this playthrough, I'm gonna do the whole destroy the Figments thing at the very end, so I can show off the various endings. That the shadows do walk through those catwalks and the control rooms there. The reason why we haven't seen stuff very often is because the Thief games basically turn off AI. That is, they don't move and they don't do anything if you're too far away from them. That includes that they don't go on patrol routes anymore. So since this level is big enough that you get quite a ways away from AI, a lot of them kind of get stuck, quote unquote, in their patrol routes a long ways away from you. So in this particular playthrough, you barely see them, but I'm pretty sure that most players would see them a lot more often. It's just that I happen to know the exact right sequence to do all this stuff, or pretty close anyway. So I work pretty efficiently, and it still takes me, about 2.5 hours. Actually, it took me 3 hours if you don't count all the editing I've done. You may not have noticed it much so far, but there've been lots and lots of deaths and mistakes and other things edited out here. So hopefully you haven't really noticed too much of the jump cutting. That was the idea, to keep it as seamless as possible. But for most people, especially if this is blind, I'm sure that could be kind of difficult. I, in hindsight, regret making the 1.1 version, because I wish I would have just fixed the 1.0 problems from the very beginning, or at least in the 1.0.1 version, but instead the 1.0.1 was kind of a impotent fix, and it just really didn't do crap. So yeah, I think most have probably played the 1.1 version, and that's too bad. Hopefully some will go back and play 1.0.2 and enjoy that it's a little more difficult, but hopefully a little more fair as well. At least that was the intent. Give the player a challenge, but give them a way to work around it. You know, I'm not trying to force the player into one situation. The idea is that there's a challenge, there's more than one way to overcome it. Even if it's climbing up this really annoying root. Because I could have used a vine arrow, but nah. I decided to just climb the root and just wait for the gem, the tear of Maw, to just come to me anyway. This is obviously inspired by when I did basically the exact same thing in Tribal Breeze, except for instead of being this ye olde gemstone, it was ye olde air talisman. This thing, like most will-o-wisps would be, this thing's basically just an elevator. It's just following waypoints, moving slowly until it touches them, then it turns and moves to the next one. So sometimes it'll go through brushes and stuff, but that's fine because elevators can do that. They're weird like that. Usually if an AI was able to walk through a brush, it would drop and disappear.
The Maw is a realm of chaos that threatens to overwhelm this world. Strange that it should be held at bay by a mere thief.
Yep. So that's the Mask of the Tormentor. If the player had gotten the mask right away before getting any of those optional objectives, well, I guess they're not optional at this difficulty, but any of those side objectives, he would have been kind of taunting Garrett every time the player got something, or kind of reprimanding him for being a thief, instead of... Yeah, see there, I got zapped by that thing by touching it. But instead of Garrett just making a little quip for each one, he would have gotten a little reprimand for each one. So that doesn't really affect the ending, aside from... Actually, no, it doesn't really affect anything at all, except for what the player hears. It gives a little bit of replayability, you know, so you get to hear... You have to play it twice to hear and see everything, basically. Because some choices let you hear and see some things, but they close doors for other ones. While then other choices let you see the other things, so... There are multiple endings, but the multiple endings can basically all be done in one playthrough, as I demonstrate with this one. So, I'm glad that there are some things that need to be done differently so you can experience them. They can't all be done in one single playthrough. This is not ye olde Deus Ex Human Revolution ending, where you can just quick save and then select the button for whichever ending you prefer. No, no, no. That's very much not what I wanted. And there's my last piece of loot, finally. There's a few pieces that I mentioned along the way in this commentary, but I didn't think of while I was playing, so I could have gotten this without having to actually climb up there and get that. So you can theoretically beat Expert if you explore more of the mines and get those other pieces of loot I missed, so you don't have to treetop search in this jungle area here, or this forest area here, this Maw area here, in order to get all those things, all the loot you need. So, never fear. It's barely so, though. In the future, I'll definitely not make it that difficult to get all the loot, because nothing sucks like searching around trying to get a loot goal. Now, the reason why that particular switch was there was because just in case the player started at the far Bay 4 door and then walked all the way around through the forest, the player could get out right there instead of having to walk back. Kind of a reward for good job of walking through the whole forest and making the effort to open the most difficult gate. So, you know, it's just kind of a little way to ease the difficulty since the player was able to go the extra mile there. Now here's the first ending. The player just goes.
I think my work here is done.
Now I wasn't aware of this because no one reported this as an issue, but there's something wrong here. He should be talking. Wasn't...
What the... Never trust an eccentric noble.
Hopefully I didn't talk over that. He says, what the... never trust an eccentric noble. And that was another excellent line by Sly Fox. No, this guy should be talking in my glorious, over-the-top aristocrat voice. But I actually forgot to include the sound files in every version. I never realized it because no one ever reported. It's strange that he never talked. No one mentioned it. I guess no one realized.
I've still got it.
And that's just a bonus for getting the last laugh, because you... Now, this is technically the bad ending, but I don't know, it has its own charm, I guess.
Well, on to the next job.
Another good line by Sly Fox. Okay, now I gotta go back and get rid of those figments. With the Vorpal blade, it goes snicker snack and leaves them dead. And as it so happens, it kills them with 2 hits. Snicker and snack. That kind of was sort of an accident. I would prefer that it would have done damage based on how hard you're hitting them, but I basically screwed up the way I implemented it, so snicker, snack. And that's just the way it works. Now, so I did forget to implement those sound files, but they are included in the 1.0.2 version, so yeah, I'm glad that they are, because even though it's not like I did a great job at the voice acting there, I do feel it's important that the player, you know, hear everything, because he does kind of have a last little line of, thanks for bringing my mask, and I'll get the hell out of here, you know, to kind of give you a little incentive to want to steal the mask back. But if you don't steal the mask back, it's basically the same ending, except for there's no, ha, I still got it, from Garrett. And it seems disappointing. It seems like it'd be a pity to not have him say that, right? I mean, you want Garrett to leave happy, right? So basically, the mission, while giving you multiple endings, it kind of assumes that the correct ending is doing this one, defeating your inner demons. Well, I guess they're not really inside of you after all, unless this whole thing is just a metaphor. Ooh, perhaps his travel to the warehouse here is a metaphor for his seeking inner balance and everything. Who knows? But anyway, it assumes that you do all this because the ending you'll be getting up here is basically the ending of him getting the book read to him. The ending of him ignoring the Keeper and just going back with the Nobleman is basically an ending that would have not really fits well with Deadly Shadows. So I assume that it goes this way.
Congratulations are in order, Garrett. We didn't anticipate you making any effort to acquire inner balance. Now that you have, however, please, come with me. You wished to hear what was foretold. Now you shall.
This is one of the possible endings here.
That shut him up.
Because why not?
You will live a very lonely life, thief. Do not expect its conclusion to be happy.
And here you should be hearing more. Well, let's try that again.
my friends that I don't need their secret book, or their glyph warnings, or their messengers. Tell them Garrett is done.
That's if you go in the crate without knocking him out or killing him or anything. You don't get reprimanded by the mask in that one. And this last one is us going along with him. So there's basically 4 endings. 5 if you count the whether or not you steal the mask back as another separate ending. There's been a couple little spots here where the video kind of the recording jerked like that, and I had to resync everything by hand. That sucked.
Interesting.
Now, Garrett, I must warn you. These prophecies speak of grave danger ahead. You may once more be the only thing standing between us and destruction. It seems that your role as a hero is not finished yet.
Here we go again.
And yeah, that keeper was voice acted by me. I'm sorry. Yep. I'm glad that both endings lead you to completely separate places. I think it really makes it satisfying. After being in the warehouse for so long, both endings show you a new place. I think that's a good way to conclude it. Now, I've got a little bonus ready for you. This is with the modification.
Tell my friends that I don't need their secret book, or their glyph warnings, or their messengers. Tell them Garrett is done.
You've at last delivered my mask. I must say, it is a most magnificent piece. I would invite you to view it in my gallery, but I have much more important business to attend to. Your payment is on my desk. Take it and be gone. I have little tolerance for petty vagabonds, as do my gods. It disgusts me to imagine that petty things hands all over
Never trust
my
an eccentric
prize.
noble.
That's what you missed out on. So, this is with the fix. Or rather, with the sound files included as they should be. Now, I want it to be so you could, like, steal the key from him, sneaky.
If those damnable paupers do not pay soon, I shall have to have them evicted.
I want it to be so you could, like, steal the key on the sneak.
Come out, right
But he always knows that you're there,
Garrett, get away from me!
which is unfortunate. I wish you could have just stole it from him on the sneak, but it just doesn't work. Because he sees you there and he remembers you there, so if you try to steal it, it alerts him, so that kind of sucks. It's not how I intended it to be, but there's really not much room here to truly sneak, so there's not too many options, to be honest. Oh well. Also, these things don't actually give you any loot.
I've still got it.
And I made a boo-boo there. You've actually got 2 Masks of the Tormentors. I forgot to take the other one away. Whoops.
Well, on to the next job.
And that's how it should be. Also, one other change with 1.0.2. This is for you, Fen. There you go. That's better, right? I swear that's how it was supposed to be in 1.0.1. I swear. We swears. Thanks for watching. Hope you had fun. Leave a comment and let me know what you thought. Bye.